The polished wood of the courtroom gleamed under the sterile fluorescent lights, a cold stage for the ugliest of human dramas. 8 months pregnant and emotionally shattered, Amelia Hayes watched her world burn. Her husband, the man she'd built her life with, sat beside his stunning mistress, his face a mask of cold indifference. His lawyer was systematically tearing her character to shreds, painting her as an unstable gold digger. Then the final blow came. As a cruel lie left her husband's lips, the room began to spin. Amelia collapsed. And from the gallery a sharp, cruel sound pierced the ensuing chaos, the mistress's triumphant laughter. But what no one knew was that the stone-faced judge at the bench was holding a secret file, a DNA report that was about to turn this entire spectacle of betrayal on its head and expose a lie so profound it would destroy everyone involved. The silence in their penthouse apartment on Chicago's Gold Coast had become a living entity. It was a thick, suffocating thing that clung to the Italian marble floors and absorbed the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. It was a silence born of betrayal, and for Amelia Hayes, it was louder than any argument they'd ever had. Just 3 months ago, this space had been filled with laughter, with the scent of Julian's expensive cologne, with the soft jazz they both loved. Now it was a mausoleum for a dead marriage. Amelia ran a hand over the gentle, taut curve of her belly. Her son. The one bright light in the encroaching darkness. He kicked a small, insistent thud against her palm, as if he could sense her distress. She was 8 months pregnant, and she had never felt more alone. Julian Hayes was, by all accounts, a man who had everything. He was the heir to the Hayes Global Logistics fortune, a company his grandfather had built from a single delivery truck into a multi-billion-dollar empire. He was devastatingly handsome, with a Cary Grant charm, and a smile that could disarm world leaders and melt the hearts of society matrons. Amelia had fallen for that smile, for the way he looked at her, as if she were the only person in the world, for the grand gestures that made their courtship feel like a Hollywood romance. He'd swept her off her feet when she was a promising junior architect, convincing her to put her own career on hold to build their life together. "You're my foundation, Amelia," he'd whispered to her on their wedding night. "Everything I build will be on you." She had believed him. She had become his perfect wife, hosting his business dinners, managing their multiple properties, and becoming the graceful, smiling woman on his arm at every charity gala. She had poured herself into him, into them, until there was little of the old Amelia left. The discovery had been disgustingly cliché. A second phone tucked away in his gym bag. She'd found it by accident looking for his car keys. The screen lit up with a message, "Can't wait to have you all to myself tonight. Jay is just the past. We're the future. Love, Isa." Isa. Isabella Rossi. Amelia knew her. A 25-year-old marketing associate at his firm with legs for days and an ambition that burned like a wildfire. Amelia had seen the way Isabella looked at Julian during the last company holiday party, a predatory gleam in her eyes that Amelia had foolishly dismissed as youthful admiration. The messages on that phone were a sordid archive of their affair stretching back over a year. Hotel rooms in cities Julian was supposedly visiting for business. Lavish gifts Amelia had never seen. And worst of all, cruel, mocking words about her boring conversation, her matronly style, and most painfully her pregnancy. "She's blowing up like a whale," one of Isabella's texts read. "Good thing you have a sleek Italian sports car to come home to." When she confronted Julian, the charming mask didn't just slip, he shattered it on the floor. There was no apology, no remorse, just cold, calculating cruelty. "It's over." Amelia, he'd said, not even looking at her, his eyes fixed on the stock ticker on his computer screen. I've filed for divorce. My lawyer will be in touch. He spoke of their 5-year marriage as if it were a failed business merger he was liquidating. He offered her a settlement so insultingly small, it was a clear message he wanted to punish her. He wanted to erase her. When she refused, vowing to fight for what was fair for her and their unborn child, he turned vicious. He claimed the baby had put an unbearable strain on their marriage, that she had become emotionally erratic and unstable. He froze their joint credit cards, leaving her stranded at a baby supply store, humiliated and helpless. He told their mutual friends that she was hormonal and hysterical, that the pregnancy had changed her into someone he no longer recognized. He was building a narrative brick by painful brick, casting himself as the victim, and her as the unhinged, pregnant wife. The narrative's leading lady was Isabella. Julian began flaunting her publicly. They were photographed at exclusive restaurants, Isabella dripping in diamonds that Amelia knew he'd bought with their money. She was a constant smiling presence in the society pages, the triumphant victor claiming her prize. The gossip columns whispered about the tragic end of the Hayes marriage, subtly painting Amelia as the frumpy older wife who couldn't keep her billionaire husband satisfied. Now, sitting in the pristine, silent living room, Amelia clutched the legal documents her lawyer Margaret Chen had sent over. Julian was petitioning for full custody of their unborn child, citing her documented emotional instability. He was claiming she was an unfit mother before she even had a chance to hold her son. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just about the money or the assets anymore. He was trying to take her child. She looked at the framed photo on the mantelpiece taken just a year ago on a trip to Santorini. They were both laughing, Julian's arm wrapped tightly around her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. They looked happy, invincible. Was it all a lie? Had she been married to a stranger all this time? A man who could smile for the camera one moment and plot her complete destruction the next. The doorbell chimed a shrill, unwelcome sound. It was a process server with another stack of papers from Julian's lawyer, Arthur Vance. This time it was a motion to have her psychologically evaluated. As Amelia closed the door, the weight of it all pressed down on her. The public humiliation, the private heartbreak, the terrifying legal battle ahead. For a moment she felt a wave of despair so powerful it threatened to pull her under. She slid down the wall, the cool marble a shock against her skin, and wrapped her arms around her belly, protecting her son from a world that had suddenly become so cold and hostile. Tears streamed down her face, silent tears for the love she thought she had for the man who had never existed, and for the fight she knew was coming. A fight she couldn't afford to lose. The weeks leading up to the preliminary court hearing were a masterclass in psychological warfare, orchestrated by Julian and his high-powered lawyer Arthur Vance. Vance was a shark in a $1,000 suit, renowned for his scorched earth tactics in high-stakes divorces. His strategy was clear: to bury Amelia under an avalanche of legal motions, depositions, and financial requests designed to exhaust and intimidate her. Amelia's lawyer, Maggie Chen, was the antithesis of Vance. She was quiet, methodical, and possessed a spine of pure steel. "They want you to break Amelia," Maggie told her during one of their late-night strategy sessions in her modest, paper-filled office. "They are throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Our job is to stand firm and show the judge who the truly unstable one is." Standing firm felt like trying to hold back a tsunami. Julian had cut off her access to their primary bank accounts, leaving her with only a small personal savings account she'd maintained from her architecture days. He'd weaponized their wealth, forcing her to rely on Maggie's willingness to work on contingency, a fact that Vance's team seemed to sneer at. The penthouse, once her home, now felt like a gilded prison. Staff who were once friendly now looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion, their loyalty clearly bought by the man who signed their paychecks. One afternoon, Amelia decided to go through Julian's old home office, a room he hadn't used since moving his main operations to his downtown headquarters. She was looking for old financial statements, anything that might help Maggie counter Julian's claim that most of his assets were tied up in untouchable family trusts. The room was sterile and impersonal, much like the man she now knew him to be. In the back of a desk drawer, beneath a pile of expired passports and old stationery, her fingers brushed against a small, locked metal box. It was old, a simple cash box, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. Curiosity piqued. She searched the desk for a key, but found nothing. A jolt of intuition, a feeling she hadn't had in years, told her this box was important. She took it to the kitchen, and with a heavy-duty screwdriver and a hammer, pried the lock open. The contents were not what she expected. There were no financial documents or hidden assets. Instead, there was a small, faded photograph of a woman Amelia didn't recognize holding a baby. On the back, written in a spidery script, were the words, "My sweet little Jacob." May 1985. There was also a bundle of yellowed letters tied with a faded blue ribbon and a single ornate silver locket. Amelia's heart hammered in her chest. Julian's name wasn't Jacob, and he was born in June of 1985, not May. She opened the locket. On one side was another smaller picture of the same woman. On the other side was a lock of fine blonde baby hair. Julian's hair was and always had been jet black, just like his father Robert Hayes. This made no sense. The letters were from the woman addressed to someone named Daniel. They spoke of a forbidden love of a secret child and of a terrible fear of a powerful family. There was no mention of the Hayes name, but the timeline was eerily close. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. It was probably nothing, just some old mementos from a previous resident of one of their properties. Julian was a pack rat for strange objects, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something significant, a loose thread in the perfect tapestry of the Hayes family legacy. She carefully placed everything back in the box and hid it in her own closet, deciding not to mention it to Maggie just yet. It felt too outlandish, too disconnected from her own brutal reality. It was a ghost story, and she was in a war. The war escalated. Vance's team deposed Amelia's friends, her family, even her former colleagues from the architecture firm she'd left 5 years ago. The questions were designed to paint a picture of a woman who was prone to emotional outbursts, who was obsessively jealous, and who had a history of dramatic episodes. They twisted a story about her crying at a sad movie into evidence of manic depression. They used the fact that she'd quit her job to marry Julian as proof that she was a gold digger from the start. Meanwhile, Isabella Rossi was playing her role to perfection. She gave a tearful exclusive interview to a popular online magazine styled as a brave woman who had fallen in love and was now being unfairly villainized. Julian and I had a connection he never had with his wife, she'd said, dabbing a perfectly manicured finger at her dry eye. His marriage was a business arrangement. Ours is love. I just want him to be happy and for everyone to move on peacefully. She even had the audacity to speak about Amelia's baby. I will love that child as if it were my own, she'd proclaimed, a statement that made Amelia physically sick. The day before the hearing, a courier delivered a large bouquet of funereal white lilies to the penthouse. The card was unsigned, but the message was clear. It was a symbol of death of surrender. Julian was telling her to give up, The scent of the lilies filled the apartment, thick and cloying like the silence. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. She sat in the nursery she had so lovingly decorated, the pale moonlight streaming through the window, illuminating the empty crib. She held the small locked box in her hands. Who was Jacob? Who was the woman in the photograph? It was a puzzle she couldn't solve, and she had a feeling that the missing pieces were far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. The storm had gathered, and tomorrow it would break directly over her head in a courtroom filled with strangers, and she would have to stand in the eye of it alone. The courtroom was a study in intimidating architecture. Soaring mahogany walls, a stern-faced bailiff, and an elevated judge's bench that resembled a throne all contributed to an atmosphere designed to diminish anyone who stood before it. Amelia, her body aching from the weight of her baby, and a sleepless night, felt herself shrink as she took her seat beside Maggie. The gallery was filled with whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. She could feel the stares of their former friends, people who had toasted their marriage at their wedding, and now watched her ordeal as if it were a spectator sport. Across the aisle sat Julian and his legal team. He looked impeccable in a custom-tailored navy suit, his face a carefully composed mask of somber concern. He wouldn't look at her. Instead, his attention was focused on Isabella, who sat in the front row of the gallery. She was dressed in a demure cream-colored dress, a picture of supportive grace. But when her eyes met Amelia's, there was a flash of pure, undisguised triumph. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, a gesture of victory that felt like a physical blow. The judge entered. Judge Eleanor Harding was a woman in her late 60s with a formidable reputation. Her sharp eyes, framed by wire-rimmed glasses, swept across the courtroom, missing nothing. She did not seem like a woman who would be easily swayed by charm or theatrics. A tiny flicker of hope ignited in Amelia's chest. The proceedings began. Arthur Vance, smooth and self-assured, rose to give his opening statement. He painted a masterful, poisonous portrait of Amelia. He spoke of a whirlwind romance where a vulnerable, incredibly wealthy man was targeted by an ambitious social climbing architect. He described a marriage that was happy only on the surface, plagued by Amelia's increasingly erratic behavior and possessiveness. Mr. Hayes did everything he could, Vance said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. He provided a life of luxury, of comfort, of security, but it was never enough. And when Mrs. Hayes became pregnant, an event that should have been a joyous occasion, her instability escalated. Her hormonal swings became violent mood swings. Her jealousy became paranoia. Mr. Hayes, fearing for his own safety, and more importantly the safety of his unborn child in such a volatile environment, made the most difficult decision of his life to end the marriage. Every word was a carefully crafted lie, a twisting of their shared history into something unrecognizable and ugly. Amelia felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation. She wanted to scream, to stand up and call him a liar, but Maggie's calm hand on her arm kept her seated. "Breathe," Maggie whispered. "This is what they do. It's just noise." When it was Maggie's turn, her approach was the opposite of Vance's. She was calm, factual, and direct. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and steady, "what you have just heard is a work of fiction, a desperate, malicious narrative created by a man trying to avoid his legal and moral obligations. The evidence will show that Amelia Hayes was a loving, supportive wife who gave up her own promising career to support her husband's. The evidence will also show that Mr. Hayes engaged in a long-term calculated affair, draining marital assets to fund a lavish lifestyle with his mistress, Ms. Isabella Rossi, who is sitting right there in the gallery. Maggie gestured briefly towards Isabella, who flinched as dozens of eyes turned her way. The evidence will show, Maggie continued, her voice rising with quiet intensity, that when Mrs. Hayes discovered this betrayal, Mr. Hayes did not apologize. He did not seek reconciliation. He sought to destroy her. He cut her off financially, launched a vicious smear campaign against her, and is now attempting to take her child. This is not about emotional instability, Your Honor. This is about power control and a billionaire's attempt to bully his pregnant wife into submission. The first witness called was Julian himself. He walked to the stand with an air of reluctant duty, a man forced to air his private pain in public. Vance led him through a series of gentle questions, allowing Julian to weave his tale of woe. Julian, Vance asked softly, "Can you describe Amelia's behavior in the months after she learned she was pregnant?" Julian sighed, running a hand through his perfect hair. "It was difficult," he said, his voice heavy with feigned sadness. "I was overjoyed, of course. I've always wanted to be a father. But Amelia, she changed. She became withdrawn, then angry. There were fits of crying for no-reason accusations. She accused my staff of spying on her. She accused me of things that were simply untrue. And this affair she alleges Vance prodded. Ms. Rossi is a colleague and a friend," Julian said, looking directly at the judge. Amelia, in her paranoia, twisted a supportive friendship into something sordid. When I tried to reassure her, she became hysterical. I suggested we seek counseling, but she refused. It reached a point where I was walking on eggshells in my own home. Lie after lie delivered with perfect sincerity. He was so convincing, so believable, that for a terrifying moment, Amelia almost doubted herself. He made her feel like the crazy one. She looked at the faces of the reporters, scribbling down his every word as gospel. She saw the sympathetic glances some of the gallery members gave him. Her reality was being dismantled and rebuilt into a monstrous fiction, and she was powerless to stop it. Maggie began her cross-examination. Her questions were sharp, precise, and backed by evidence. She presented credit card statements showing tens of thousands of dollars spent on jewelry from Tiffany's, none of which Amelia had ever received. She showed hotel bills from a resort in Bali. For 2 people during a week, Julian was supposed to be at a tech conference in Seattle. With each piece of evidence, Julian had a smooth, plausible explanation. The jewelry was a corporate gift. The hotel booking was a mistake made by his assistant, which was later canceled. He was a master of deflection, of plausible deniability. He remained calm, unflustered, the picture of a wronged man. As the day wore on, the weight of the lies pressed down on Amelia. The air in the courtroom grew thick and stale. Her back ached, her feet were swollen, and the baby was pressing uncomfortably against her ribs. She watched Julian on the stand, this handsome stranger who knew all her secrets and was using them to ruin her. The love she had felt for him had curdled into a toxic mixture of grief and rage. This wasn't a divorce, it was an execution, and as Judge Harding called for the midday recess, Amelia knew the worst was yet to come. Her turn on the stand, her trial in the theater of lies. The lunch recess offered no respite. Amelia couldn't eat the food, tasting like ash in her mouth. She spent the hour in a small, windowless conference room with Maggie going over the questions Vance was likely to ask. Each potential question felt like a needle probing at her most vulnerable spots. Her decision to leave her career, her emotional state during the early difficult months of her pregnancy, her reaction to discovering the affair. He will try to make you angry, Amelia. Maggie warned, her gaze steady and serious. He will provoke you. Twist your words and try to elicit the very hysterical reaction he's been fabricating. You cannot give it to him. Stay calm. Answer only the question asked. Be brief. We cannot let him turn this into a circus. Amelia nodded, though her heart felt like a trapped bird beating against her ribs. I'll try, Maggie. I'll try. When she was called to the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. Every step she took felt momentous, the short walk from the table to the witness box, feeling like a mile. She settled into the chair, her hands clutching each other in her lap, her swollen belly a prominent shield in front of her. She avoided looking at Julian, but she could feel his cold gaze on her. She chanced a look at the gallery and saw Isabella, who was watching her with an expression of intense predatory focus, a smirk playing on her lips. Maggie's direct examination was gentle, designed to establish Amelia's character and tell her side of the story in a simple, straightforward way. Amelia spoke of her love for Julian, of their shared dreams of a family, of her excitement about the baby. She described the shock and devastation of discovering his infidelity. Her voice was quiet but steady. She was holding it together. Then Arthur Vance rose for his cross-examination. He approached the witness box with a slow, deliberate pace, a faint, condescending smile on his face. Mrs. Hayes, he began, his voice silky smooth. You claim you gave up a promising career in architecture to marry my client. Is it not true that at the time your firm had just lost a major contract and was facing significant layoffs? There were financial difficulties at the firm, yes, but so it's possible your career wasn't so much given up as it was already failing. Vance interrupted, cutting her off. And that marrying a Hayes was a rather convenient safety net. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is badgering the witness and mischaracterizing her testimony, Maggie said, rising to her feet. Sustained, Judge Harding said, her eyes fixed on Vance. Watch your tone, Mr. Vance. Vance gave a slight bow of his head, but the damage was done. He continued his assault, picking apart every aspect of her life. He brought up an email she had sent to her sister, complaining about morning sickness and feeling overwhelmed. Would you describe yourself as overwhelmed and depressed in this email, Mrs. Hayes? I was having a difficult first trimester. It's normal for... But you were depressed, weren't you? So depressed that you couldn't even handle the normal rigors of pregnancy. How would you possibly handle the stress of a newborn? On and on it went. He twisted her grief into instability, her anger into irrational rage. He made her sound like a fragile, pathetic creature on the verge of a complete breakdown. Amelia focused on a spot on the wall behind the judge's head, trying to dissociate, to retreat to a place in her mind where his words couldn't touch her. She gave short, clipped answers, her voice growing thinner with each question. Then came the final brutal blow, Mrs. Hayes Vance said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still carried through the silent courtroom. Isn't it true that 2 weeks before you claim you discovered my client's alleged affair, you had a meeting with a prominent divorce attorney, a Mr. David Chen, who happens to be your own counsel's husband? Isn't it true that you were planning to divorce Mr. Hayes all along, and that this story of an affair is a fiction you concocted to secure a larger settlement? The lie was so audacious, so utterly baseless that it took Amelia's breath away. Maggie's husband was a tax attorney, not a divorce lawyer. Amelia had never met him. It was a complete fabrication designed to make her look like a scheming, greedy liar. That's not true, she stammered, her composure finally cracking. I never met him. I would never. Oh, but you did. Mrs. Hayes Vance pressed, sensing her unraveling. Are you now committing perjury under oath? Her head began to spin. The faces in the courtroom started to blur. She looked at Julian, pleading with her eyes for him to stop this, to end this nightmare. He just stared back at her, his expression utterly blank, as if he were watching a mildly interesting television show. He was going to let this happen. He wanted it to happen. And then from the gallery, she heard it. A small sound, quickly suppressed, but unmistakable. It was Isabella, trying to stifle a laugh. A laugh of pure, unadulterated victory. She was enjoying this. She was relishing Amelia's public evisceration. That single sound was the final fracture. The room tilted violently. Black spots danced in Amelia's vision. A sharp, searing pain shot through her lower abdomen, causing her to gasp. Her hand flew to her belly. The baby, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She tried to stand to get away, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The bailiff started to move towards her, his face a mask of alarm. Maggie was shouting her name, but all Amelia could hear was a loud ringing in her ears. The last thing she saw before the world went black was Judge Harding's face, her expression no longer impartial, but one of cold, controlled fury. Then she collapsed, sliding from the witness chair onto the cold, hard floor of the courtroom. Chaos erupted, and through it all, the faint, cruel echo of Isabella's laughter hung in the air like poison. The jarring clamor of the courtroom faded into a muffled hum. Amelia awoke to the scent of rubbing alcohol and the cool touch of a damp cloth on her forehead. She was lying on a worn leather sofa in a room lined with books from floor to ceiling. The wood-paneled walls and the heavy oak desk told her she was in the judge's chambers. Maggie was beside her, her face etched with concern. A paramedic was taking her blood pressure. Easy, Mrs. Hayes, the paramedic said gently. You fainted. Your blood pressure took a dip, but it's stabilizing now. The baby's heartbeat seems strong, but you need to go to the hospital to get checked out properly. Amelia pushed herself up, her mind clearing. No, I'm not going anywhere. I have to finish. The thought of Vance's smug face and Isabella's laugh filled her with a new cold resolve. She would not let them win this way. She would not be carried out of that courtroom on a stretcher like a victim. Just then the door opened, and Judge Harding entered, her black robes swishing behind her. She dismissed the paramedic with a nod. Her gaze softened slightly as she looked at Amelia. Mrs. Hayes, you've had a severe shock. You should be resting. With all due respect, Your Honor, I need to see this through. Amelia said, her voice stronger than she expected. Judge Harding studied her for a long moment, then turned to Maggie. I have cleared the courtroom save for counsel and the parties involved. We will reconvene in 10 minutes. But first a word with you and Mr. Vance. After Amelia confirmed she felt steady enough, Maggie left to join Vance in the judge's main office. Amelia remained on the sofa sipping the water a clerk had brought her, the silence of the chambers a welcome balm. She could only imagine the conversation happening next door. Inside the judge's office, Arthur Vance was pacing, indignant. Your Honor, this is an obvious ploy for sympathy. A transparently theatrical stunt by a woman who was just caught lying under oath. Judge Harding, seated behind her imposing desk, fixed him with an icy glare that stopped him in his tracks. Sit down, Mr. Vance. He hesitated, then complied. Let me be very clear, the judge said, her voice low and dangerous. What I witnessed in my courtroom today was not a cross-examination. It was a calculated, cruel, and unprofessional attempt to mentally break a woman who is 8 months pregnant. You pushed her until she collapsed, and your client's associate in the gallery had the gall to laugh. I suggest you choose your next words with extreme care. Vance's arrogance faltered, replaced by a flicker of apprehension. My apologies if my methods were zealous, Your Honor. I was merely advocating for my client. There's a line between zealous advocacy and abuse, Mr. Vance. You crossed it, Judge Harding stated flatly. She then turned her attention to Maggie. Ms. Chen, I trust your client is feeling better. She is shaken, but resolute. Your Honor, Maggie replied. Judge Harding steepled her fingers, her expression unreadable. This case has presented a number of irregularities, specifically in Mr. Hayes's financial disclosures. The documents provided by your firm, Mr. Vance, seem to be meticulously curated to conceal more than they reveal. There are inconsistencies regarding the official records of the Hayes Global Logistics Family Trust. Vance stiffened. Your Honor, my client has been fully transparent. The trusts are complex, but everything is in order. Is it? The judge countered. Because when things don't add up in my courtroom, I tend to ask questions. And sometimes when I ask questions, people send me answers. She reached into a drawer of her desk and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. It had no return address and was marked with a single typewritten word, personal. This was delivered to my chambers by courier 2 days ago from an anonymous source, she said, placing it on the desk between the two lawyers. It purports to contain information pertinent to the character and standing of your client, Mr. Vance. Specifically, it pertains to his very identity and his legitimate claim to the Hayes family fortune. A thick silence descended on the room. Vance stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Maggie's eyes widened in surprise. What is this? Vance demanded, his voice strained. Anonymous, unsubstantiated slander has no place in these proceedings. I move to have it stricken and destroyed. I haven't entered it into the proceedings yet, Mr. Vance. I am informing you of its existence, Judge Harding replied calmly. Given the events of today, and given my own concerns about your client's veracity on the stand, I have decided to unseal this document in open court. We will reconvene, and we will get to the bottom of this. All of this. She stood a clear dismissal. 10 minutes. When Maggie returned to the antechamber, her face was a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Amelia, she said, her voice a hushed whisper. The judge has something. A file. She says it's about Julian's identity. Amelia's blood ran cold. She thought immediately of the locked box, of the photograph, the locket, the name Jacob. It couldn't be. It was too impossible. She grabbed Maggie's arm, her eyes wide. Maggie, there's something I didn't tell you, something I found. Quickly she recounted her discovery of the box and its strange contents. As she spoke, the pieces began to click into place in Maggie's mind. The secrecy, Julian's desperation to control the divorce, his need to paint Amelia as unstable. It might not have been just about money or cruelty. It might have been about protecting a secret so monumental it formed the very foundation of his life. My God, Maggie breathed. If this is what I think it is. They walked back into the courtroom together. Amelia's earlier fear replaced by a trembling, uncertain anticipation. The room was empty except for Julian Vance and Isabella, who had been permitted to stay. Julian was whispering furiously to Vance, his composed facade gone, replaced by a sheen of sweat on his brow. Isabella looked confused and annoyed, as if this delay were a personal inconvenience. They all rose as Judge Harding took the bench. She held the thick manila envelope in her hand. The air was electric with tension. Mr. Hayes, the judge, said, her voice ringing with authority. "During your testimony, you swore an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We are about to find out if you honored that oath." She took a letter opener and slit the envelope. The sound of the paper tearing was unnaturally loud in the silent, waiting courtroom. The stage was set for the final act. Judge Harding pulled a sheaf of papers from the envelope. The courtroom held a collective breath. Julian Hayes stood beside his lawyer's table, his knuckles white where he gripped the polished wood. Arthur Vance looked pale. His usual confidence utterly gone, replaced by a look of sheer dread. Isabella Rossi, in the front row, leaned forward, her brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and irritation. This was not how her victory was supposed to unfold. Amelia stood with Maggie, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The pain from her collapse had subsided into a dull ache, overshadowed by the electric tension that crackled in the air. She thought of the small, faded photograph of the baby boy named Jacob, and her heart hammered against her rib. This file. Judge Harding began her voice. "A clear, commanding bell is a comprehensive report from a private investigator. It seems someone with intimate knowledge of the Hayes family has a conscience." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The report details a long-hidden secret, one that goes to the very heart of this case, as it concerns matters of fraud, inheritance, and identity. She held up the first document. It was a copy of a birth certificate. "This is the official birth certificate of Julian Robert Hayes, born June 12, 1985, to Robert and Eleanor Hayes. The document this court and the world accepts as fact." Then she held up a second document. "And this," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "is a copy of another birth certificate. For one Jacob Miller, born May 5, 1985, to a Ms. Catherine Miller, a young nurse who worked at the same hospital where Eleanor Hayes was a long-term patient being treated for infertility." Julian flinched as if he'd been struck. The name. Jacob. Amelia's breath hitched in her throat. "The report details a tragic story," the judge continued, her eyes scanning the pages. "A story of a desperate couple, Robert and Eleanor Hayes, unable to conceive an heir to their vast fortune. And a story of a young single mother with no resources. An illegal private adoption was arranged. A cash payment was made. And the baby, Jacob Miller, was given to the Hayes family. The hospital records were falsified, and Jacob Miller ceased to exist. In his place, Julian Hayes, the miracle baby, was born." A collective gasp went through the small remaining audience in the courtroom. Vance slumped into his chair, looking utterly defeated. Isabella's perfectly made-up face was a mask of disbelief. This is preposterous," Julian finally choked out, his voice cracking. "It's slander-forged documents from some disgruntled employee, I thought you might say," that Judge Harding said calmly. She pulled the final, most damning document from the file. "Which is why the source also included this. It is a certified lab report containing the results of a DNA test." She held it up for the court to see. "The test compares DNA secretly obtained from a drinking glass used by your father Robert Hayes at his country club with DNA obtained from a coffee cup you used last week, Mr. Hayes. The samples were provided to the investigator by a trusted longtime member of the Hayes household staff who believed a great injustice was being done to Mrs. Hayes. The room was deathly silent. The results are conclusive," Judge Harding declared, her voice resonating with finality. The probability of Robert Hayes being your biological father is 0%. You, Mr. Hayes, are not a Hayes by blood. You are, in fact, Jacob Miller. The name spoken aloud in the sanctum of the court seemed to hang in the air, shattering the illusion of Julian's entire life. He staggered back, his face ashen. The charm, the arrogance, the cold control, it all melted away, revealing a terrified, desperate man. He was a fraud. His entire life, his name, his inheritance, it was all built on a lie. And suddenly everything made a terrible kind of sense to Amelia. His obsession with legacy, his desperation for a biological child, a true Hayes heir to solidify his tenuous claim, his willingness to destroy her rather than risk a contentious divorce that might unearth his family's secrets. Her pregnancy hadn't been a threat to their marriage. It had been a threat to his lie. But that is not all the judge said, her gaze now turning to Isabella. The file contained more. It included text messages between Julian and Isabella. Messages that went far beyond mocking Amelia. They detailed a plan. Judge Harding read one aloud. Once the baby is born, we file for full custody. With her history of instability, no court will side with her. We raise him as our own, the true Hayes heir. She'll be left with nothing. Signed, J. The callous, premeditated cruelty of it sucked the air from Amelia's lungs. They weren't just going to leave her. They were going to steal her son. Isabella Rossi finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. The man she had attached herself to was not the powerful heir to a billion-dollar dynasty. He was an imposter with a false name, and as of this moment, no access to the Hayes fortune. The life of luxury she had envisioned, the status she had craved, it was all turning to dust before her eyes. The blood drained from her face. Her prize was worthless. Julian stared at Amelia, his eyes wide with a horrifying cocktail of hatred, fear, and pleading. In that moment, she didn't see the monster who had tried to destroy her. She saw a pathetic, frightened little boy named Jacob, who had built a palace on a foundation of sand and was now watching it get washed away by the tide. Judge Harding laid the papers down on her bench. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice like chipping ice, "given that your client has perjured himself, committed fraud on this court, and appears to have engaged in a conspiracy to unlawfully deprive a mother of her child, I believe we are done here for today. All prior motions are dismissed. All marital assets are hereby frozen pending a full investigation into the Hayes estate, and temporary sole custody of the unborn child is granted to Mrs. Hayes with a permanent restraining order against Mr. Hayes and Ms. Rossi." The gavel came down with a sharp, definitive crack. It was the sound of Julian's world ending, and the sound of Amelia's new one beginning. The aftermath was swift and brutal. As soon as Judge Harding's gavel fell, Arthur Vance, a man whose loyalty extended only as far as his client's bank account, turned to Julian and spoke 3 quiet, devastating words. "We are done." He packed his briefcase and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. Julian stood frozen, a statue of ruin. He was no longer Julian Hayes, the titan of industry. He was Jacob Miller, a ghost in a borrowed suit. He turned to Isabella, his last remaining ally, his eyes pleading. She looked back at him not with love or sympathy, but with pure, unadulterated contempt. The man she had bet her future on was a fraud. "Don't you dare look at me!" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She grabbed her purse and practically fled the courtroom, pushing past the reporters, who were now swarming at the doors, sensing a story far bigger than a simple society divorce. The last person Julian looked at was Amelia. Their eyes met across the now empty space. There was no triumph in her gaze, no "I told you so." The rage had burned out, leaving behind only a profound, aching sadness for the life they could have had, and for the man he never was. She gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a final silent acknowledgement of the end, and then turned her back on him for the last time, letting Maggie guide her out a private side exit. The news exploded. The Hayes heir hoax became the headline of every major news outlet. The story of the secret adoption, the falsified records, and Julian's or Jacob's fraudulent claim to the family fortune was a scandal of epic proportions. The Hayes family, notoriously private, was plunged into a firestorm of public humiliation and legal battles. Robert Hayes, a titan brought low by his own deceit, suffered a major stroke. The empire began to crumble under the weight of its own lies. The divorce proceedings became a mere formality. With his identity exposed and the true Hayes family relatives contesting his entire life's claim, Julian had nothing left to bargain with. The penthouse, the cars, the stocks, none of it was legally his to give or withhold. The court awarded Amelia a generous settlement from the legitimate marital assets accrued during their 5 years together, more than enough for her and her son to start over. The custody battle vanished. Julian was in no position to fight for a child, and he made no attempt to. He disappeared from public life, swallowed by the scandal he had desperately tried to avoid. Amelia heard a rumor that he had left the country living under his birth name, Jacob Miller, a man without a past or a future. Amelia moved out of the cold, silent penthouse and into a bright, airy apartment in a quieter neighborhood. It was smaller, cozier, and for the first time in years it felt like her own. She filled it not with expensive art and designer furniture, but with comfortable chairs, shelves of books on architecture, and the scent of baking bread. She reconnected with her old self, the woman who had existed before Mrs. Julian Hayes. She started sketching again, her designs more innovative and personal than ever before. The fire for her career, which she thought had been extinguished, was rekindled into a steady, confident flame. 2 months later, in the quiet of a new morning, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful boy. She named him Ethan. Not Hayes, not Miller, but Carter, her own maiden name. As she held him in her arms for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapping around hers, the last vestiges of her old life fell away. The pain, the betrayal, the public humiliation, it all faded in the overwhelming, fierce love she felt for her son. He was not a legacy or an heir to a fraudulent fortune. He was simply hers. One crisp autumn afternoon, a few months later, Amelia sat by her window, rocking Ethan to sleep. The city buzzed with life below, but in her small apartment, there was only peace. A package had arrived earlier that day. It was the small metal box she had found in Julian's old desk. Maggie had retrieved it for her. Inside the photograph of the young woman Catherine Miller and her baby Jacob looked up at her. With a new sense of understanding, Amelia no longer saw a ghost story, but a tragedy. A story of a mother who had lost her son. She thought about Julian one last time, not with anger, but with a strange, distant pity. He had spent his entire life terrified of being exposed, and in doing so had become a man whose character was as false as his name. He had chased a legacy that was never his, and in the process had destroyed any chance of creating a real one of his own. Ethan stirred in her arms, his breath warm against her skin. She looked down at his perfect sleeping face. This was her legacy. Truth, resilience, a love that was real and unconditional. The courtroom drama felt like a lifetime ago, a scene from someone else's story. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned but forged. She was no longer just a wife or a victim. She was Amelia Carter, an architect, a mother and a survivor, finally stepping into the dawn of a life that was entirely beautifully her own. The story of Amelia Hayes is a harrowing reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to the surface. It's a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable betrayal. We see how a life built on lies is destined to crumble, and how true strength is often discovered in our darkest moments. Have you or someone you know ever faced a situation where everything you believed in was turned upside down? How do you think you would react if you discovered a secret that changed your entire reality? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates a powerful tale of justice and rebirth. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another incredible real-life story. Thank you for listening.